Imagine this. You wake up one morning, but something is different. The familiar voice in your head, the one that constantly judges, narrates, and defines who you are, is gone. No self-doubt, no hunger for validation, no fear of how others perceive you, just silence. At first, it's disorienting. You step out of bed and look in the mirror, expecting the usual flood of thoughts. How do I look? Am I still the same person? But there is no reaction. The reflection is just that, a reflection. No attachment, no identity, no story attached to the face staring back. You walk outside and the world feels untouched, as if seeing it for the first time. The trees do not whisper meanings. The people passing by do not trigger insecurities, and the sky stretches above you, vast and indifferent. Nothing belongs to you, not even you. Now ask yourself, is this liberation or is this death? We spend our lives constructing an identity, layering ourselves in stories, achievements, opinions, and desires. We fight to be someone, to be recognized, respected, admired, to be honored and appreciated. Yet, beneath it all, there lingers an unsettling suspicion. What if the thing I call myself is nothing but a carefully crafted illusion? This is the paradox of existence. To let go of the ego is to dissolve the very thing that gives us a sense of purpose and importance. But to cling to it is to live in constant fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of being forgotten, fear of being disrespected, fear of losing. What happens when a man goes beyond this fear? When he stops defending his image, his pride, his sense of self? What remains when the scaffolding of identity collapses? There was a man who dared to find out. He did not simply suppress his ego or quiet it temporarily, he killed it. And in doing so, he entered a state that most would consider either enlightenment or insanity. Before we explore how he did it, we must first understand the force he destroyed. Because the ego is not just a concept, it is the invisible master that rules us all. And if you think you are in control, think again. The ego is a parasite. It convinces you that it is you, that its voice is your voice. But in reality, it is a mask, a fragile construct built from childhood conditioning, societal expectations, cultural and religious beliefs, and in some cases, unconscious fears. It is a defense mechanism, a survival strategy, a desperate attempt to impose meaning onto a world that never promised it. From the moment you were born, your mind began constructing this illusion. A name was given to you. Labels were attached: good boy, bad girl, smart, dumb, attractive, ugly, strong, weak, lazy. You were rewarded for fitting into the mold and punished for stepping outside of it. Every experience, every praise, every rejection was another brick in the fortress of your identity. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to function in the world. But beneath the persona lies something darker, the shadow, the parts of yourself you were told to suppress. Your selfishness, your rage, your deepest insecurities, your emotions, your weaknesses, and sometimes your preference. The ego's job is to keep this hidden, to construct a version of yourself that is acceptable to others. And so, it whispers lies. You are better than them. You are worse than them. You must prove yourself. You must be special. You must be remembered. You must be respected. You must be recognized and consulted. It is never satisfied. Nietzsche saw this clearly when he wrote, "Man is something that shall be overcome." He understood that most people live as slaves to their own self-image, spending their lives chasing status, validation, influence, relevance, and power, only to find that none of it brings them peace. Arthur Schopenhauer took it even further. He argued that the ego is nothing more than a puppet controlled by blind, irrational desires. You think you're making choices, but in reality, you are being pulled by instincts, cravings, and the fear of non-existence. The ego convinces you that you must achieve, must be someone, because the alternative is unthinkable: nothingness. This is why true freedom is terrifying. If you strip away the ego, what remains? If you are not your name, your reputation, your opinions, who are you? The man who killed his ego did not arrive at this realization easily. He was like everyone else, trapped in the endless pursuit of self-importance. But one day, something changed, something cracked, and in that moment, he glimpsed a truth so profound that it shattered everything he thought he knew about himself. But here's the problem. The destruction of the ego does not come without consequences. Because when the mask is gone, you are forced to confront something far more unsettling: the emptiness beneath it. And most people are not ready for that. Imagine, for a moment, that everything you thought you were was an illusion. Not just your name or your achievements, but your opinions, your emotions, even your deepest fears. Imagine realizing that all of it, the self you spent years crafting, was never truly you to begin with. This is what happened to the man who killed his ego. He expected freedom, perhaps even enlightenment. Instead, he encountered something far more unsettling: the void. At first, it was exhilarating. There was no more fear of judgment, no more need to prove anything. The constant mental chatter had vanished. He felt like a ghost, moving through the world without the weight of identity. But then, something else crept in. A silence too deep, a stillness that felt almost unnatural. He walked past a mirror and felt nothing. He looked at old photographs of himself, and they seemed like strangers. Without his ego, he was no one. And if he was no one, what was the point of existing at all? Most people never reach this point because the ego protects them from it. It keeps them busy, chasing success, worrying about the future, scared to make mistakes and replaying past mistakes. It convinces them that they must be someone, that their life must have meaning, that they must behave a certain way. It fills the void with ambition, relationships, distractions. But when the ego dies, so do all of these illusions. This is why so many who attempt to transcend the self experience existential collapse. Some monks and mystics spend years meditating only to fall into deep depression when they realize that the self they sought to purify never existed in the first place. Others turn to self-destruction, unable to find a reason to continue when stripped of their constructed identity. Even Friedrich Nietzsche himself, who so often spoke of transcending the human condition, ultimately descended into madness. His final years were spent in a psychotic haze, having gazed too long into the abyss. And yet, the man who killed his ego did not fall apart. He did not retreat back into illusion. Instead, he made a discovery that changed everything. Because beyond the void, beyond the emptiness, there was something else, something deeper, something untouched by fear or desire, something real. But before we uncover what he found, we must first ask, if the ego is not real, then what is? And how do we exist without it? The man who killed his ego stood at the edge of nothingness. The identity he once clung to had dissolved. His ambitions, his fears, his sense of self, all gone. He was not enlightened. He was not at peace. He was simply empty. And yet, the world continued. The wind still moved through the trees, the sun still rose. People still spoke to him, though their words felt distant, as if they were addressing someone who no longer existed. But then, something changed. At first, it was subtle, a sensation beyond thought, beyond feeling, a raw awareness. He was still here, not as a name, not as a reputation, but as something deeper, something wordless. For the first time, he was seeing reality as it was, without the distortions of the ego. He wasn't interpreting the world through personal meaning. He wasn't filtering experiences through past wounds. He wasn't expecting, projecting, or controlling. He was simply being. This is the great rebellion, the act of seeing through the ego's illusion and refusing to let it dictate your existence. Because the truth is, you do not need it. You do not need the constant inner monologue, the self-judgment, the endless comparisons. You do not need to be someone, you only need to be. But how? How do you kill the ego without losing yourself? How do you exist without the thing that has defined you for so long? The answer is not destruction, it is transcendence. Killing the ego does not mean erasing yourself. It means seeing through the illusion and choosing something greater. It means detaching from false identity, not falling into nihilism. It means stepping beyond the need to control, to be special, to be remembered. The man who killed his ego did not become less. He became more. Because without the weight of self-importance, he was free. Free to think without bias or prejudice. Free to act without fear. Free to love without condition. This is the path of those who truly awaken. The path of thinkers like Laozi, who spoke of flowing with existence rather than controlling it. The path of Marcus Aurelius, who reminded himself daily that he was nothing but a small part of the vast universe. The path of Zen masters who laugh at the absurdity of the self, knowing that clinging to identity is the source of suffering. But the world does not want you to take this path. Society thrives on ego, on competition, on comparison, on consumption. If people were to let go of their constructed identities, their insecurities, their endless need to prove themselves, what would happen? The system would collapse. Because without ego, you're no longer a pawn in someone else's game. You do not chase approval, buy things to show off and feel valuable, or seek status to feel worthy. You become untouchable, free from manipulation, free from the need to conform, and that is the greatest act of rebellion. But here's the final question, the one that remains after the ego is gone. If you are not your name, your reputation, or your desires, then what are you? The man who killed his ego discovered the answer, and once he did, he was never the same again. The man who killed his ego stood at the threshold of something vast. He had spent his life trying to be someone, building, defending, proving. Now, stripped of identity, he had reached a terrifying yet exhilarating realization. He was nothing. But in that nothingness, he found something he had never known before. Freedom. Because to be nothing meant he could be anything. The chains were gone. He no longer needed to justify his existence, no longer needed to play the game of status, competition, comparison, and validation. He no longer sought meaning in fleeting achievements or in the approval of others. He was no longer bound by past mistakes, no longer haunted by the future. He was simply here. And in that presence, life became something it had never been before. Not a struggle, not a series of ambitions and regrets, not a constant need to prove, but an unfolding, a dance, a dream, but one in which he was finally awake. This is the secret hidden in every great spiritual teaching, buried beneath layers of complexity and dogma. There was never anything to attain. There was never anything to prove. You were already free, always had been. It was only the ego that convinced you otherwise. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The ego is that unconscious force. It keeps you locked in stories you didn't write, in roles you never questioned. It tells you who you are and what you must do, and without realizing it, you obey. But when you see through the illusion, when you truly see it, something shifts. You stop reacting, you stop chasing, you stop resisting, and instead, you allow. And so, he smiled. Not because he had found an answer, but because he had realized there was never a question to begin with. And now, the only question that remains is this: are you ready to see through the illusion? Or will you continue playing a game that was never real?
Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was insightful and educative. If you like this video, do well to click like, share, and subscribe for more insightful videos like this. See you later. Bye.